Welcome back to New View EDU, a podcast from the National Association of Independent Schools on what's next for school leaders. I'm Debra Wilson, president of NAIS. This is a special live edition of New View EDU. I'm Debra Wilson, president of NAIS, and I am so thrilled to have Jenny Wallace back on the show. Here with us today are not just educators and leaders from NAIS schools, but also from schools representing 20 other state, regional, and national associations. This topic is just so relevant to all of us across the independent school industry. And it's always great when we can work together to offer conversations like this one. And hopefully, Jenny, I mean, this is going to be such a big book, but I remember your last book. There was a lot of traveling, there was a lot of speaking, and so hopefully this will streamline at least a little bit on the front end. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, I'm thrilled. I have a real fondness as with 3 children in NAIS schools, or 3 that went through, 2 that are still in, 1 that graduated. I'm grateful for all you do to help our kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's such important work. For those of you joining us, Jenny and I first met when she was working on her last book, Never Enough: When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic. Jenny, I love that this cover is not quite as sort of striking as that one. It kind of gave my husband a complex every time he saw Never Enough written in like big letters. And Jenny joined us in season 6 of New View EDU, and she also joined us at Thrive. At that point in time, we were discussing her findings around achievement culture and its impact on kids, parents, and schools. And now she's taking those lessons and really looking at that work and looking at a wider movement around mattering. So in her forthcoming book, due out in less than 2 weeks, is Mattering: The Secret to a Life of Deep Connection and Purpose. And we're so excited to have this conversation today. We're going to have a little dialogue, just like we always do on New View EDU, and then we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So Q&A is open. So for those of you listening, if you want to put in some questions as they come up. And Jenny, you got to hold up the book, and it's just an honor just to welcome you back. Look at
Thank
that.
you guys. I know it has a little bit of a never enough feel to it, but it rhymes. They look nice together next to on the shelf.
Well, I'm delighted, and I enjoyed reading it over break. My son taught me how to send my e-copy to my Kindle, and I enjoyed getting the opportunity to kind of get a little bit of a pre-read so that we could have this conversation today. And you spent years investigating the impacts of achievement culture on kids. That's when Sonia Luther introduced the two of us many, many years ago, a mutual good friend of both of ours and a mentor who I know we both miss. And she'd be so proud of this book, I think, because it was so key to her work too. But it's interesting. You've said that you wish that in some ways you wrote this book first before you wrote Never Enough. Tell me a little bit about that. Why is that?
Yeah, so Never Enough, it was about a year into researching Never Enough, where I was, going all around the country, meeting with families, meeting with young people, with educators, hearing about their experiences. And what struck me in those conversations was what would happen after my interviews about the young person. And it was that so many of the adults that I spoke with opened up and they said, I feel like this never enough feeling too. I feel like I don't matter. It didn't matter if it was a doctor at a major medical center who felt crushed by the insurance companies, or educators, teachers who felt like they were not appreciated for the role that they're playing, or caregivers who felt like they mattered too much to their kids and their needs were never prioritized. So I kept hearing this over and over again. And what I realized, and this is, decades worth of resilience research, that if we want to make a dent in the youth mental health crisis, we need to go upstream and take care of the adults in their lives because they are struggling. They are struggling in our community. And there's lots of reasons why they are struggling. This is not a personal issue. This is really an issue that's been in the making since the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. Robert Putnam talked about bowling alone, those issues, having to be one family villages for, it's wearing on adults. It's eroding this mattering. So the reason I wish I had written mattering first was because I think it's really hard for parents to lead with mattering, to encourage a sense of mattering, foster a sense of mattering, if they don't feel it themselves.
Yeah.
And if they don't know how to connect to it themselves, and if they are reeling from the stressors in our world today. And so really mattering is the prequel to Never Enough, is the way I see it.
So first, I got to ask you one question, then I'm going to ask you specifically about mattering. But
Okay.
given when you started doing this work, so like you kind of really started digging into this before the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
Do
Well
you think it's
before.
gotten worse post-pandemic?
Are we talking about achievement or are we talking about mattering?
Just a little bit of both.
Hmm.
Like, do you feel like this is that much more important now because of what we see post-pandemic?
I do. So I think it was, just to back up a minute, I'm a journalist, but I'm also a parent of three children. I have a 20-year-old, I have an 18-year-old, and I have a 15-year-old who go to independent schools. I could say it to this group, Collegiate and Spence, in New York City. So I'd been sort of living with the independent school system and the parents and the expectations of parents, expectations of our community where we live. And I'd been noticing over the years how different my kid's childhood was from mine. And that's really what made me dig into this. So the pressures were there. Then COVID hit. And I remember thinking, oh my God, maybe I don't have to write this book. Maybe this is the great reset. Parents are now, slowing down. They're able to sit at dinner tables with their kids. All these millions of activities have stopped. And maybe this is the reset we all needed. And then a few months into COVID, the accelerated playgroups started, the panic in parents that their kids were now behind because of the pandemic just ramped up. And I will say I think it's just unfortunately growing and growing and growing. And now that AI is on the scene, I think it is adding a whole new layer to the pressure that parents are feeling, that educators are feeling, that college students are feeling. It's disrupting everything. So I believe it has gotten worse. And I believe mattering has eroded even more out of COVID. I think there were habits that we picked up during COVID that have made it acceptable to flake on friends, to cancel at the last minute, to normalize staying home and isolating. So I think things have gotten worse, both for young people and for the adults in their lives. And actually, the data from Rick Weisbord at Making Caring Common ran this study a year ago, and he was looking at caregivers and he was looking at teenagers. And they found a 1-to-1 ratio of mental health struggles and at least one parent in the household. So, my point in saying this is that we are right to sound the alarm about the youth mental health crisis, but we would be just as right to be sounding the alarm about the mental health crisis of the adults in their lives. And these issues that we're going to talk about today are bigger than any one family, any one school, any one community. These are a societal shift that we have all been witnessing. And when viewed through the mattering lens, it offers both a diagnosis, but also a solution. So I am hopeful. Despite what we are seeing today, there is hope. And I think people are grasping for hope.
Yeah, and I think we so need it. And from, reading this book and reading your last book, it actually doesn't have to be that hard. I don't think. So let's talk about it. So define mattering for
Yeah.
us so that everybody's on the same page. How does it
Great.
show up in everyday life? Like what is it? What does it look like?
So we've all heard the word mattering, but I think most of us don't realize, and I certainly didn't before researching Never Enough, that mattering is a fundamental human need. It is not a nice to have feeling, it's a fundamental human need, and that is to feel valued and to have an opportunity to add value to the world. Researchers who study it say that after the drive for food and shelter, it is the drive, the motivation to matter that shapes human behavior for better or for worse. So when we feel like we matter, we show up fully, we engage, we connect, we contribute. When we are made to feel like we don't matter, we can either turn against ourselves, become anxious, depressed, turn to substances to try to alleviate the pain, or lash out in anger, right? Road rage, online attacks, political extremes. These are desperate attempts to say, oh, I don't matter. I'll show you I matter. So people will go to great lengths to matter. They will commit crimes to matter. There was a study that I quote in Mattering on suicidal men. Researchers were studying, and the two words that were most often used to describe their pain was useless and worthless. Those are the words of feeling like you don't matter. So mattering shows up. But what struck me in my research when I asked people, when do you feel like you matter? Or when is the last time you could think that you felt like you mattered? It was never, a toast at a milestone birthday or a big award at work. Actually, it was in the small moments of everyday life. I saw this play out when I was giving a keynote at SAIS, I think it was. And
That was fun. I remember when you did that.
right, I think it
Yep.
was there. And a teacher was given, tell me if you remember the story. I was either there or was at Enrollment Management Association. I'm like flipping between the two. But anyway, a teacher was receiving a national award and he was receiving it by his colleagues at his school. But what brought him to tears, what choked him up, was the thing that his colleagues gave with the award. Do you remember this? It was a jar of his favorite, like 3:30 snack, which was
Right.
M&Ms. And so what he felt in that moment was, I am seen, I am known by my colleagues. My little quirks, my preferences are worth remembering. We as humans crave to matter in the everydayness of life, the mundane, not in the big things. So really the shift to mattering is in these small moments. It's remembering the details of our everyday lives.
I
And
love
it's feeling like people are invested in you. They know you, they care about you, you are seen, you're appreciated.
I love that. Yeah, that and it is so unique too. I mean, particularly, schools are pretty intense places. They're intense workplaces, and there's so much focus on kids, so that when we think about adult mattering, it can show up in different kinds of ways. So let's talk about that. You looked a lot at kids and sort of the ramifications for schools and parents. So let's look at people who work in schools. Talk to us about, particularly mattering too much. I had a great exchange with a head of school, who another head has announced his retirement, and I said, I can't believe, that you're retiring. He and I worked on a chapter of a book together years and years ago. And he said, "Yeah, I can't wait to be an NIP." And I said, "What's an NIP?" And he said, "A not important person."
Mm, I
So,
get that.
so tell me about mattering too much, because you and we've talked on it sort of in passing before, but tell me about that, and like particularly in schools.
Yeah, so let me start by saying I am the daughter of an educator. My mother was an English teacher at the high school level for 30 years. So I know what the commitment is to be an educator. It has never been a harder time to be an educator. The expectations have skyrocketed, and the support systems have eroded just because of this limited bandwidth that we all have. There's so much coming into us and so much output being demanded. Um, so what I mean by mattering too much, I actually have a whole chapter in the book uh, about educators and about this idea that you can work such essential roles. You can be, you can matter too much to everyone else and your needs not feel prioritized. And I think that is something that educators are feeling today. The intense focus on young people, And comes, we call it the passion tax, right? This idea that because I work such a meaningful job, because I have such purposeful work, that I should allow that to overshadow my own needs. That is what it means to matter too much. And that is not healthy. It's not sustainable. Certainly, caregivers, parents feel that as well, this sense of mattering too much. I have felt that myself. I have neglected my own needs. And what I learned in researching mattering for now the past 7 years is that I am not my best self. I can't show up as my best self if I am not also meeting my needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I interviewed a wonderful teacher, Dana, in the book, who talked about how she mattered so much to her young people. She had very large class sizes that she would not go to the bathroom because she didn't have backup. And she would, not to be graphic, but she would have constant UTIs, which her doctor called caregiver diseases, that people in caring professions, doctors, nurses, teachers, are ones that feel like they have to hold in, even going to the bathroom, these basic needs, because other people's needs are more important than they are. That is what leads to burnout. It's also what leads to disengagement. We are seeing wide statistics of burnout and disengagement. Something like 70% of the workforce employees are reporting feeling disengaged. The way I view disengagement through the lens of mattering is that when we feel as individual workers like we don't matter for whatever reason that is, it's a painful feeling. It releases these painful neurochemicals in our brains. And to stop that, if we don't feel like we have a voice or agency, to stop it is to disengage. That's the coping strategy that we employ. So one of my real hopes in talking about mattering is that we can reframe disengagement, and also reframe burnout. I mean, burnout is the idea that you are so needed
Right.
without support. So that is what burnout equals overwhelm. And the
So,
overwhelm is when the demands increase, but the supports don't.
so, so in your mind, is that almost like mattering, like kind of like going around, like coming up the other side,
I
like
feel like it's on a spectrum.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah,
mattering too much, and feeling like you don't matter at all.
right. And they can almost lead to the same symptoms because
Exactly.
on the one hand, you feel like you don't matter, so you're disengaged. On the other hand, you get so burnt out that you're also disengaged. Like
Yes,
there's kind of both of those.
exactly.
So you also encourage, the setting of like personal policies, right?
Yes.
To protect time and energy.
Yes.
And you and I have had this conversation, I think, a little bit. We've both sometimes struggled with those, but like talk about those a little bit. What are those? What are some good examples?
So I wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal, I don't know what it was, 8 years ago or so, about the power of personal policies. And these are simple rules that we can set in our life that guide our decisions. And so ever since writing that, I've come up with my own personal policies. I'll give you one that has nothing to do with work, and then I'll give you one that has to do with work. The one that does not have to do with work is that I have a personal policy that I do not cancel on friends unless I am sick. So that is my personal policy. And I will tell you, in our flaky cancel culture,
Yep, yep.
canceling meaning breaking plans, that one personal policy has deepened my friendships so much. So when your friends feel like a priority to you, when they feel like they matter to you, that is, you're sending them the signal that you matter enough that I'm going to carve out time in pen, in stone, that I'm going to see you, right? That is what sets up trust. And that trust is what deepens relationships. It what's make people, be willing to be vulnerable and open up because they believe they can trust you. So anyway, that's one simple rule that I have made. When it comes to work, I mean, these personal policies are so personal. But I have set a rule that at 6 o'clock, I don't answer work calls unless I'm doing a webinar and I plan in advance. But that is my time when I want to try to shut off my role as a journalist and step into my role as a parent. And then when my kids go and do their homework, then I'll go back to work. But I really try to create as much boundaries as I can around my various roles. So personal policies are just simple guides that you can create in your own life to protect your energy, to save you from constantly having to make decisions.
Right. It's sort of your line in the sand. Like this is,
Exactly.
how many do you have?
I have, well, here's one other one. Here's a very important one that took me way too long, embarrassingly long to figure out, is as a, you know, full-time employee and also a full-time parent that I want to be. I would go literally weeks and months without ever asking myself, what do I need? What are my needs? I remember when my kids were little, I didn't even think about my needs. They didn't even make it on the to-do list. And so since researching mattering, what I have realized is that it begins, especially with people in leadership, it begins with mattering to ourselves. And how do we matter to ourselves? Actually, I was giving a keynote at a conference of the most successful female wealth managers in the country. And I was talking about the importance of mattering and mattering at work. And after my talk, one by one, the women came up to me and they said, but how do I matter to myself? But how do I matter to myself? So here's what I have done. There's a personal policy that I set for myself. Every single morning, as I am brushing my teeth, so that's my signal to do this, I say to myself, what is one small need that I need to take care of for myself today so that I can show up as my best self for the people who are depending on me? And so, again, those are super personal. For me, it could be I need a 1 hour walk with a friend, or I need a cup of coffee for 45 minutes uninterrupted, reading the newspaper, doing things that have nothing to do with what anybody else wants, just for me. So I would encourage you to think of one need a day. There's a quote in my book from a teacher who says her realization that self-care is actually other care. That when and speaking of burnout, leaders are burning out at the highest rates, right? You are contending with um, anxious families. You are contending with a changing workforce. You are contending with AI. You are contending with political issues. You are contending with the idea that you're supposed to be solving the world's problems in your school through your letters and in your classrooms when world leaders can't solve them. So you have a lot of stressors on your plate. For you to be able to show up and be your best self for the people depending on you, fill the need. Figure out what one of those needs are. The other thing, Deborah, that you and I have had many conversations about is Sonia Luther's work on educator and parent resilience.
Yes.
I wrote about Sonia's research in Never Enough, and then because I find it so critical and important, and it's been life-changing to me, I wrote about it again in more depth in Mattering. And what I'm specifically talking about is how do we increase our resilience? So if the demands in our lives are increasing, which feel like almost every single day, the demands keep going up, how do we raise support for ourselves? Because that is the only way that we are able to stay resilient and not to burn out and not to be overwhelmed. And so what Sonia's research, and this is not a unique finding, this is decades worth of resilience research, that our resilience as humans rests on the resilience of the friends in our lives, the depth and support of their relationships. So, Deborah, you know this study well. There was a pilot study that has since been replicated out of
Yeah.
Mayo Clinic. It was a group of busy physicians who were also mothers. And researchers had them meet for 1 hour a week in small groups over the course of 12 weeks. The women, after 12 weeks, first of all, nobody dropped out. People said it was remarkable how much you could build trust in such a small period of time. The women reported feeling higher levels of well-being, greater resilience, lower rates of cortisol, even better parents. This is a finding that has been replicated. Sonia also created these authentic connection
Connections.
groups
Yep.
among educators, leaders, heads of schools, males. And what it is, I was trying to figure out what exactly is it about this formula of meeting for 1 hour a week. What is the secret to this? I think there are a few things. One is it is having people who share your perspective on life, your burdens, your experiences. So having like-minded people, people who are in a similar stage of life. Number two, it's finding people who are willing to be vulnerable with you and you are willing to be vulnerable with them. How do you create the conditions for that vulnerability? You create the conditions by carving that time in your calendar and protecting it. Like what I said earlier about prioritizing my friendships by not canceling on them, having that 1 hour a week where those women felt like a priority, that is what fed their resilience. So to me, that is a major takeaway and something that I have employed in my own life for the past 7 years, ever since researching. That was such a gift that Sonia gave us, such a gift.
Yeah, well, and it gets to some of that relationship research too, right? Like that long-term Harvard research. I don't even know how long that's been going on
80
for.
years.
80 years, right? So, those who had the healthiest lives and, arguably the more successful lives, purposeful lives, the relationships were crucial.
That's it.
Um,
Wait, you're reminding me of maybe my favorite study ever done, where friends were looking at the foot. So researchers brought friends to the foot of a hill. The incline did not look as steep when they were standing with their friend as it did when they were standing there alone.
oh, that's so interesting. I have
Isn't that
not
great?
seen that one. Yes, yes.
Our friends act as kind of shock absorbers from the stressors of everyday life. So finding and nurturing those friendships and what those friendships deliver for us is a sense of mattering. They make us feel important. They make us feel appreciated. They make us feel invested in, and they make us feel dependent on. And those are the four critical ingredients to mattering. And relationships that deliver on mattering are delivering those ingredients.
How does that work? So a lot of this, there's like a give and take here, right? Like you want to feel like you're receiving that,
Yeah.
but there's also value to giving that, right? So would you just talk a little bit about sort of the effect of asking, for advice and the motivation that comes from having contact, like, with like the beneficiaries, like
Yes.
those whom we impact, because that's a big part of school too, right? Like that's and it's complicated. I always say schools, they're the most human, they're among the most human places.
Mhm.
Hospitals, schools, nursing homes, they're just so incredibly human dependent. So talk a little bit about that, like, asking for advice, like being a beneficiary, having beneficiaries, and like that importance of like that contact, particularly, in professions like teaching.
So, just to underscore the definition of mattering again, it's feeling valued, but also having an opportunity to add value.
Right.
So when we feel valued, we are more likely to add value. And when we add value, we feel valued. So it becomes this positive spiral, this sort of positive upward spiral. So we're help seeking, asking for advice, research finds, is one of being asked, being the person that somebody asked for advice, is one of the richest sources of self-esteem for humans. It signals to somebody that you trust them, that you depend and rely on them, that they have wisdom that you want, that you want for yourself. But so many of us in this hyper individualistic culture that we live in today are reluctant to ask for help. I certainly used to be one of these people. I didn't want to burden my friends. I could do this on my own. I didn't want to, everybody's exhausted dealing with their own. But here's what I found is that when I don't ask for help, not only do I deny myself the help that I need, I also deny my friend the chance of being a helper, of letting them know how much they matter to me. So I think in any setting, but particularly a school setting, being able to model that interdependence, that healthy interdependence is how we feel valued and how we sort of unlock that sense of feeling valued and mattering with the people around us, asking for advice, opening up to someone, asking their perspective, saying, I trust your judgment here. What would you do? These are the ways that we let people know that they matter and that they are essential pieces in this puzzle of life.
I love that. I feel like that's a gift in our sort of piece of the world within independent schools. They tend to have pretty strong relationships and do reach out, like, and are game to talk to people. I mean, the number of people who will call me for something and we might talk about it and they'll say, and you should talk to so and so. And I know they would be happy to talk with you. Like, it's I've always thought of it as it's a gift in just in our space, like just how people interact with each other, how they support each other, and how thoughtful they can be for each other because there's such empathy for the experiences of colleagues who've walked similar trails. Uh,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. What so I don't know, now you've got me like thinking about a few different questions. Just thinking about, you've given us some good practical tips about what we can do to center mattering and find balance for ourselves. Like, if when you think about school leaders, we worry so much about I worry about leaders and leaders tend to worry about faculty, right? Like, and their
Mm.
staff, and they're worried about burnout. Like, what are some like just sort of low lift kind of practical suggestions that maybe you've seen in schools or just from the other research that you've done or just other models you've seen in other places? I know you've traveled hither and yon and talked to people in all kinds of different roles. I mean, like what would you recommend for school leaders, looking at trying to like drive up this feeling and this kind of engagement with their faculty and staff?
Yeah, so I would say, some of the things that I've seen, I was I'll give you something I think is a low-hanging fruit that I saw personally at a nonprofit that I visited. So on the social workers' doors of this nonprofit were yellow stickers that were left by clients saying things like, thank you for supporting our family. Thank you for believing in us when no one else did, all of these words of appreciation. And then when you walked further into the nonprofit, into the development and the accounting offices, those doors were bare. And so the executive director realized that, and she decided to help connect everyone to the mission. And so she put up a bulletin board that said, tell someone how they matter. And she left out note cards and pens and push pins. And she started with her assistant. I'm blanking on the assistant's name right now, but let's say it's Bree. Bree, thank you. Because of your organizational skills, we are able to serve hundreds of more families. And then somebody else left a note for development. Because of your efforts, we were able to get 500 coats for the youth in our care. And then there was something in accounting. Because you stayed this weekend and combed through the budget, we were able to find the money for a family to stay in their apartment. So what this nonprofit did was it words of appreciation that buffer against burnout and build a sense of mattering are specific. They are about the doer. So it's about connecting people to their impact. We are so busy. We have so much demands on us that we often don't close the loop. We often don't circle back. We ask somebody for advice, Deborah, and then we don't say if we took it and how it worked out. You know, somebody offers to connect us to somebody, and then we never send the email that says, I connected with John. And oh my goodness, did he give me the best advice? Thank you so much for that. I feel like we're going to start doing this now because of it. So really, it takes 30 seconds to just close the loop. And that is a low hanging fruit. If you could just think in your mind, the next time somebody does something, offers you a piece of advice, makes a connection for you, does something, circle back with a quick text, a quick email. I have in the book this practice that I learned from somebody that I've started doing myself, just a simple text that says, if it weren't for you, dot, dot, dot. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have had the courage to go for that big job. Thank you for believing in me when I don't always believe in myself. So closing the loop, telling people why they matter. Here's another thing that I think
Well,
both
that sounds like a cultural shift too, right? Like that's not just for school leaders. Like I could see some of our schools looking at that as I don't think it would be a huge culture shift in a lot of schools, but it's almost, I mean, it's mattering, but it's also noticing, right? It's being in the habit of noticing and
it's
articulating.
slowing down. Like that's what mattering allows us. It encourages us to slow down for a minute and to notice the people and to notice the gifts that people give us. So it's mattering is a meta need, which means it sits above all other needs, encompassing things like belonging, connection, mastery, self-determination, even gratitude. And so what I would love to keep going with tips, but while I have this in my head, I want to just say what I love about mattering schools are so focused, rightfully so, on belonging, how important belonging is. But mattering goes deeper than belonging. So you could belong to a classroom or belong to a club or belong to the English department and not feel like you actually matter to the people there. Mattering it goes deeper than belonging. It connects you to your impact. It says that you have value, you are adding value to this group. So another way, which I think is a great thing both for students and for staff, is this idea that was inspired by, have you ever heard of the company BetterHelp?
Yep.
Okay, so they piloted something. They have since disbanded it, and I have sort of taken it on as my mission to expand it even more. But it's this idea. Okay, picture a faculty member, John. Picture him in the middle of a circle. And what are his values? What are his core character strengths that he brings to the school? He is dependable, conscientious, kind, empathic. Then draw a circle around John. And how does John impact his colleagues and the students in his life? He is devoted. He is a team player. He is incredibly patient. Whatever it is that he is doing that is impacting the students and the faculty. Then think of another ring. How is John impacting the school community as a whole? How is he living out the values of that school? And then finally, a bigger ring. How is John impacting society? How is what John does every day going to make the world a better place? I think if we could create these mattering maps for faculty, and I was on a podcast with Tara Kinsey from Hewitt, who's now at Charlotte Country Day. And she and I were talking about how she reaches out to staff, and she does these random shout outs at the beginning of weekly meetings. So she will reach out to somebody, I want to do a shout out for John. She would reach out to his colleagues. What are some of the things John has done lately that I could shout out? And then maybe even shout out to a parent and get how that teacher has impacted that student. So it is concrete ways, it is connecting people to their impact. I tell this story, chapter 1 in the book is a story about firefighters. I was like, which jobs do you know that you matter no matter what? Which jobs, like, of course you matter. And I was like, firefighters, right? They run into burning buildings to save people. Here's what I didn't know about firefighters. So when I first started researching it, I learned that they are burning out and disengaging at record levels. I also learned that they were dying by suicide more than they were on the job. And there are lots of reasons for this. One main reason is that they are constantly exposed to secondary PTSD, day in and day out. The other reason was, and I learned this through a story, I won't ruin it in the book, but that they were disconnected to their impact. So I didn't know this, but firefighters are often the first to arrive at the scene of a car accident or a medical emergency. They stabilize the victim, and then EMS takes over and rushes them to the hospital. And then the firefighters never know what happened next. Did their actions make a difference at all? Over time, that lack of connecting to their impact can burn them out and even fuel cynicism, the firefighters told me. And so I interviewed a fire chief in North Charleston, South Carolina, Greg, who created a system to change that. He tracked the outcomes of rescues so that his firefighters could know when their actions saved a life or eased someone's suffering. And so his firefighters were able to connect to their impact. That is a lesson I think we can all learn to connect others in our lives to their impact, but also connect to our impact. There are people that I interviewed for the book that keep what I call impact files, and those are letters from parents, thankful letters from parents. They are thankful,
As opposed to some of the
appreciative,
other ones. Yeah.
appreciative letters from parents, appreciative letters from faculty. And when a former student goes on to achieve something great, they clip it and they put it in their impact file. And when they are wondering if they are making an impact, they pull that out and they are reminded. We are all wired by evolution with a negativity bias, meaning that the bad is stronger than the good in our lives. What these impact files do is it helps us to override that wiring that's within us, and it forces us to pay attention to the good. So those are just a few tips. I have so many in the book, but if it weren't for you connecting employees to their impact and also keeping an impact file for yourself, either on your Google Docs or in a physical file, thank you notes, etc.
I love that. We talk a lot about being able to tell the story of a school through what happens with the students, where they go, how they succeed, the things that they achieve. But the idea of doing this also to build school culture so that you also understand those stories internally. I always talk about education as the long game. You
Mhm.
know, yes, it's great to work with 5-year-olds. You see a lot of progress. They're in a great developmental stage, but it's really laying that groundwork for years and years and years down the road. And so to get that feeling.
Mhm.
I'm gonna shift gears. I love all of those ideas. Um, you speak a lot about you speak about life transitions in a few ways in your book. Um, and I don't know if you look at the profile of schools and the number of people retiring, or even when people are transitioning into our spaces, from, other careers, you talk about sort of the unsettling sense of weightlessness that people feel during major life transitions. Um, why is having like meaningful responsibility or what you call the good kind of weight, like actually restorative? Like talk a
Yes.
little bit about those transitions because you know, we're a pretty big industry. We have a lot of schools, and every year, we have people going through major life transitions, and I'm sure there are people, who will either listen on the podcast or with us today who are looking at those transitions. Talk to me a little bit about that and like how you think about those transitions.
So transitions, even ones that we choose, even good transitions, can shake our sense of mattering. So transitions like starting a new job, relocating, or painful transitions like going through a divorce or losing a loved one or getting fired or retiring. The reason transitions are so disruptive to our sense of self is that the role that once gave us such a sense of feeling valued and knowing just how we added value shifts, and it leaves us a bit unmoored. And so I have a whole chapter in the book, and actually I have an article running, I believe, this weekend in the Wall Street Journal, but there's so much
Excellent.
breaking news that we'll see if it's actually going to run about retirement and mattering. It'll either run this weekend or next weekend. But first, I will say that transitions are painful and they are destabilizing because by their very definition, they are sort of this liminal space between who we were and who we are becoming in these new roles. And so I spoke with so many people about transitions to get advice, what worked for them. I looked at the research. And so I can offer you what I learned, which has been transformative for me. And this is something we could also help students if we have children going to college
Yeah.
or starting new jobs or relocating. We can help them, guide them this way. So the first step is one realizing that transitions are hard and that it's not a personal failing if you are not coping well. These are right.
I think everybody needs to hear that.
We
It's
really
an
we
important piece.
It is, and we personalize instead of contextualize what's happening in our lives, right? We feel shame that we're not coping as well as we should. So first, I would say get rid of the shame, push it aside, and realize this is a human experience that all of us go through. Next, I would say look for role models. Who are people who have gone through similar transitions and made it out the other side? They might be people in your life that you could interview. And by the way, make them feel like they matter because you're asking for their wisdom. But maybe it's listening to a podcast on the topic. Maybe it's reading a nonfiction book or an article about a similar transition. It offers you comfort that you're not alone. But more importantly, it can offer you a kind of blueprint, a map to help you find your way through that transition. The next thing I would say is harness the power of invitation. So, what do I mean by that? I mean, when we are going through something hard and people invite us to stuff, it can be very easy to feel like we're just not up for it. We're not our best selves. We shouldn't show up the way we are. We're too much. We're a bit messy. And I will tell you, there is wonderful research called the beautiful mess effect, which is the idea that we overestimate how the messiness in our lives will hit other people. That actually it won't turn them off from us. If anything, it makes us more authentic. It brings people closer to us. So the beautiful mess effect sort of throws upside down this idea that you need to be perfect to be loved. You just need to be who you are and show up who you are. Um, I spoke with a woman who went through a very painful divorce, and she was tired of being the fifth wheel, going out to dinner with her couple friends, who never allowed her to pick up the bill, etc. And she stopped going out with her friends, and she told her therapist, "Well, now I'm even more isolated." And the therapist said, "You have agency here. You should start hosting dinner parties and invite your girlfriends to you. You have agency." So what I will say is you have agency to matter again. Not only agency, I would argue, and I argue in the book, as human beings on this earth, we have a responsibility to make ourselves useful again. And so the way back can start small, right? It could be, reaching out to a lonely neighbor. It could be helping a single mother who's struggling in your community. There are many, many, many ways. It could be sending a text if it weren't for you to somebody to connect them to their impact. What I have found is that the fastest way to feel like we matter again is to remind someone else why they do. So it's taking your self-focused lens and turning it outward and finding a way to let the people in your life know that they matter to you. And I will tell you, you will realize just how much you matter in this world, that we are all interconnected, that we all play a role in each other's well-being.
Yeah, to probably a much bigger extent than we can possibly see, right?
Yes, there was a great quote by Jane Goodall. Something I'm going to paraphrase it, but it was something like, all of us make an impact on the earth. You have to decide if you're making a positive impact or a negative impact. So I will say the same to you. We are all making an impact. No one is walking, through this world without impacting others. So ask yourself, am I impacting people in a positive way? Here's the other thing I would love to say to school leaders. There is some research, lots of research actually, on something called the long arm of the job. So I have a chapter in the book on mattering at work. And in my mind, why mattering in the workplace, I believe, is the solution both to the youth mental health crisis and to the political polarization of our times. So let me step back and explain my argument quickly. So research finds that, and I'm not talking about school communities necessarily, I'm talking about all workplaces, that when we are made to feel like we don't matter at work, so maybe it's a teacher whose parents are just piling on her, and she is just feeling like, dear God, I don't matter here to these families. I'm pouring my heart out and educating their kids, and boy, do they make me feel like I don't matter. That teacher goes home and the negative effect of her day spills over into her personal life. She is sitting at the dinner table, she is trying to connect with her child, but she is replaying the incivility, the rudeness of the families who sent her those rude emails. And researchers call it proximal separation. This idea that you would be in the same room as your child, but you would be separated because you are, again, still stuck at the incivility in the workplace. And so what I argue in the book to leaders, again, not just school leaders, to anybody, is that mattering at work is critical. If we want to support, if we know that children's resilience rests on the resilience of the adults in their lives, and we know that adults spend the majority of their waking hours in the workplace, if we can go and make adults feel like they matter at work, that is how we can bring caregivers and parents home to their kids, fully their best selves, sturdy adults, so that they could act as the first responders to those kids' struggles. You cannot do it if you are constantly beaten down at your job. You cannot show up as your best self. And here's the other side of that equation. Other research by political theorists have found that people who don't feel like they have a voice or agency at work are less likely to show up in positive ways civically and politically. They are less likely to vote. They are less likely to show up at school board meetings. They're less likely to respond to a blood shortage in their community and donate blood. If you don't feel like you matter at the place you are spending 8, 10, 12 hours a day, you don't feel like you matter in the wider world. So to me, mattering at work is the most critical focus and especially in the age of AI, when there is such a risk of people feeling replaceable and not valued, and not dependent and relied on. We humans need to be useful. We need to feel valued. We need to add value. So anyway, this is just my 2 cents, but I believe mattering at work is the most important thing we can do to solve the youth mental health crisis and to solve the political polarization that we're seeing in the world today.
So I want to look to one of our questions, um, because it's almost the opposite, right? So the question is this: if a teaching faculty is expressing to leadership that they're burnt out, how would you advise leadership to address this? And I think we've talked about that. But I also love the second part, which is, and what would you caution them to avoid doing?
the
So
teacher.
yeah, so like what's the opposite, right? Like
Yeah.
what's the cold water on mattering?
Well, I would say if your teacher is feeling burnt out, if they are struggling, the first thing I would do is scan the environment for antimattering. I would
I like
scan,
this. Now we're turning into physicists here. We've got anti
yes.
coming into the
So
equation. So
so anti-mattering is this idea that you do not matter, and that is very painful. And those messages could be sent even unintentionally because we're so distracted because we don't have time in our calendar for people to come and talk to us, that we're short because we just don't have time, that we don't respond to emails, that we are short in our emails, that we are making people feel like they don't matter. So I would take a step back and I would kind of search the environment. I'd look at the department head. I'd look at, some of the families that might be, somebody, it's so interesting, on Instagram, someone DM'd me, a parent, and she said, I am furious. My child's chemistry teacher is yelling at kids. All the parents are up in arms. This is not okay. What should we say to her? What should we say to the school head? And I said, I think you should say, I think that teacher needs more support, that that teacher is struggling, and that that teacher is a human. And I think what you should say, if you say it, if you're gonna go it above to the boss, to that higher ed, to say, I think she could use more support in the classroom. I think she could use more support. And the woman said to me, oh wow, I hadn't thought about it that way. I think parents are so panicked and fearful. We see the steep inequality in the world today. We see AI. How are we going to, create safety nets for our kids so that they don't, fall on the wrong side of the economic divide? That we are so narrowly focused on our kids that we don't look at the people in their lives. So empathy, building back empathy, which is really just a societal problem. But what I'm hopeful about is that schools can be countercultural places.
yeah,
Schools can be ecosystems that breed mattering from the inside out. They could be a place where everyone, staff, faculty, parents, students, where you could be forward focusing on mattering. Parents today are starved for shepherdship. They are looking for leaders. They are looking for people to guide them. Heads of school it's an enormous responsibility. But boy, if you could say, we are going to lead with mattering. This is going to be, we are going to do everything I can to make sure your students know they matter because we know that's what leads to high achievement. And we're going to make sure our faculty know they matter and our students know they matter. And there are schools that are doing this. And this is the field guide. This is it. Make this a community read and start leading with mattering. Be countercultural spaces. We need them in our world.
I love that. All right, I'm going to do one more, maybe two more
Okay.
questions.
Okay.
This one's from Vanessa. I love your ideas about personal policies, vulnerable relationships, and mattering to ourselves. I've implemented small practices that have made a real difference, but there are still moments when I feel underwater and overwhelmed. What strategies help in the moment when we're right in the middle of that feeling?
So this is something that I do for myself, and I try to remind my kids when they are going through something hard. I pause and I say, Jenny, how would your best self show up right now? What would your best self say in this situation? So it is giving yourself a pause and a reframe, widening your lens. So when we are stressed, when we are overwhelmed, right, our lens narrows. So by taking a breath and saying, how would my well rested, very supported self respond in this situation? So that has helped my kids too. When they've gone through struggles, and asking them, yes, not in this moment, how would you respond, but how would your best self respond? That to me has been a really helpful strategy.
I love that. There's so many good questions in here, and so maybe we'll do sort of another follow-up at another time. But this is a question from Adriana. Harvard Business Review just wrote an interesting piece on reducing the number of initiatives. Curious if you're seeing trends or research on initiative overload and its effect on mattering and organizational culture.
Oh, I think so. I think leaders are overwhelmed. I think teachers are overwhelmed. Here is what I will say about mattering is that mattering is not another thing to add to your already too long to-do list. Mattering is a lens with which you look at your to-do list. So mattering is the lens with which you see your environment, you see your daily tasks, your priorities, and the people in your life. So it isn't another thing to do. It is, and so if I would argue that putting the mattering lens on everything will help you figure out which initiatives actually make people feel like they matter, important, invested in, dependent on, and which don't.
Can you please speak about mattering and potentially belonging for educators and citizens from marginalized populations in communities where there is aggression and very loud messages of not belonging and not mattering in this current political climate? Like
It
people
is.
feel like they're not being seen.
This is, boy, I wish we had an hour to talk about this. This is a critical issue of our time. And I don't have a short answer for this. I don't have a simple answer for this, but I will tell you that feeling seen and validated goes a long way in creating a buffer against so much of what we are seeing today in the popular culture.
Yeah.
Can I leave you with a quick challenge that I've
Of
given
course.
myself?
I love a quick challenge. Yes.
Okay, so this is my challenge for myself this year, to imagine everyone I meet wearing an invisible sign that says, "Tell me, do I matter?" We can all answer that question, that fundamental question that every single human is asking in the back of their mind. And we can answer it with warmth, with kindness, even just with eye contact, with compassion instead of judgment. So make mattering your mission this year. I don't know, Deborah, the book is not out for another 10 days, but if you pre-order it now and you go to my website where it says mattering at the top and you click down to pre-order, you can get today immediately 40 pages of exclusive content with a 30-day mattering challenge, my favorite strategies, a chapter of the book, and so much more. So those pre-order incentives will go away, unfortunately, on January 27th. So claim them now. If you're ever going to buy Mattering, buy it now so you can get the free stuff.
We all love free stuff.
We all love free stuff.
Dresses with pockets, like we all love
Yes,
free stuff.
all the things.
Well, Jenny, I mean, as always, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm so glad that you're doing this work. I can't even tell you. I was thrilled about your first book, and I'm glad you've expanded it. And I just think it will make a difference in our schools, but hopefully it makes a difference to the way that people just travel through the world. So thank you for being with us today. I look forward to our future conversations. Thanks so much to everyone who attended, and special thanks to all of our association partners who helped make this event possible. We will have a recording of today's conversation on New View EDU and the podcast next week. Jenny, we'll send you the link, as you know. And everyone make sure to join us in March for the launch of season 10. So thank you, Jenny.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Bye-bye.